Last year, Nangyang Zhen stood on an American campus, denouncing what she called discrimination. Florida had passed a law restricting Chinese nationals from working in university research labs. Zhang, a student and president of the Chinese Students and Scholars Association at the University of Florida, called it nationality-based oppression. But while she was leading protests, federal investigators say she was also leading something else, a multi-million-dollar smuggling scheme. Zhang wasn't just organizing student events, she was posing as a biomedical researcher to help illegally ship controlled elements to China, using her student email and status to get around federal restrictions. Among the substances she and others helped move, purified proteins of cholera and whooping cough. They also illegally smuggled out fentanyl, meth, and other substances that were more than drugs. They were concentrated, high-purity compounds used by researchers for reproducibility. So far, one person's been convicted and others are facing trial. Zhang, she was banned from campus for 3 years, and her whereabouts are unknown. It's one of hundreds of cases where Chinese nationals, some students, were caught stealing American technology, smuggling out sensitive research or items, or acting on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. It raises an elephant in the room. Are Chinese students a security threat to the United States and other countries? I'm Ken LaCourte. I researched this issue to first understand it, and then give it to you as straightforwardly as I can. Today, we're looking at what some call a largely ignored national security threat. Because the first thing that got my attention when I looked into this is how many Chinese students are here. Over 250,000. And many help the Chinese Communist Party's goals here. And a small number have become outright tools of espionage. There's a lot going on here. First, we'll look at what the Chinese threat is all about. And then what created the student surge in Chinese students. Then we'll look at the CCP pressure these students face, and importantly, put it into proper context. Finally, we'll look at possible paths forward from here. So Beijing, they've been stealing technology from the rest of the world for decades. Not quietly, not occasionally, but systematically. Fighter jet designs, biotech formulas, solar breakthroughs. Stealing intellectual property has been an essential part of China's economic growth. They've hit universities, corporations, government labs, and I'm not really talking here about hackers or people breaking into offices at night. More often than not, the theft comes through the front door, with a student visa and a resume full of collaborative research. Essentially, China has crowdsourced spying. Chen Song, she showed up at Stanford as a neurology researcher, working in an academic lab. But she wasn't just a visiting scholar, she was also a Chinese military officer. During her time here, investigators say she systematically transmitted Stanford research, as well as details about the school's research methodologies and capabilities. Another case, Yanqing Yi. On paper, she was a physics student at Boston University. But she was also a lieutenant in the People's Liberation Army, sent to gather intelligence on U.S. military researchers and report it back to China. She combed through U.S. military websites and built dossiers on scientists working in AI and robotics. And what kind of research is China most interested in today? Artificial intelligence. Look, it's both the most transformative technology of our time and the most dangerous. If the 1950s were all about stealing nuclear secrets, today it's code. AI is the new Manhattan Project. It's not just about faster algorithms or cooler gadgets, it's about controlling the future. Military power, surveillance capability, economic warfare. AI can both optimize supply chains and it can identify dissidents. It can defend critical infrastructure or destroy it. And whoever leads this space may just lead the world. Which brings us to Linwei Ding. He wasn't a student, but a software engineer at Google, working on some of their most advanced AI chip designs. Ding secretly founded a Chinese AI company while still on Google's payroll. He uploaded code and hundreds of confidential files, and then pitched it all to a Chinese government talent program, promising to help China match world-class computing infrastructures. The Department of Justice charged him with handing over critical U.S. intellectual property to Chinese entities. He's still awaiting trial. Again, this isn't cloak and dagger espionage. No one's scaling fences. They're walking in with a resume or a student visa, and sometimes a Chinese government scholarship. Some of it's part of a broader initiative that China launched in 2028 called the 1,000 Talents Plan. It was a plan to recruit leading experts in tech, and they often targeted those who were already working or studying in the United States to bring their expertise and sometimes their research back to China. Many visiting students and junior scholars are actively recruited into these programs. sometimes with promises of research funding, lab access, or jobs back home. And right now, China has thousands of those people in the right place at the right time and with access. And the foundation of the whole program is on campuses throughout the country. So let's talk about the number of Chinese students in the United States, because it's a whole lot. About 275,000 at last count. That's about a quarter of all foreign students in the United States. To put that in perspective, if they lived in their own city, it would be the 79th largest city in the United States, about the size of St. Louis or Buffalo. And the number of American students studying in China? About 600. But why? Why did China send so many students here, and why did the United States let them in? After the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre, the US government handed out extended visas and asylum to tens of thousands of Chinese students. They were hoping that China's brightest would defect to freedom. But the real surge came in the 2000s. For many universities, Chinese students became their business model. They paid full freight and brought in billions of dollars in tuition. Heck, some public universities rely on Chinese enrollment to balance their state budgets. And Beijing didn't just encourage education abroad, it systematized it. It set up agencies to place students in strategic fields. It was a perfect storm. US schools chasing tuition dollars, China pushing for advanced training in science, business, and engineering. Now, Chinese families always saw an American diploma as a ticket to a better future. And in most ways, they were absolutely right. But in recent years, there's been a shift in intent for some. Beyond families, students are now being selected, sponsored, and managed by Chinese institutions with direct ties to the government. The primary mechanism? The China Scholarship Council, overseen by Beijing's Ministry of Education. It gives full scholarships, including tuition, housing, and living stipends, to thousands of students headed abroad, mainly to the United States and mainly in sensitive research fields. It's a policy American universities help implement. And before these sponsored students ever step foot on campus, they sign a written contract, pledging obedience to the party and promising not to embarrass China abroad. They also name 2 guarantors, usually family members, who will be held financially liable if the student doesn't follow the rules or fails to come home. The message is clear: you represent the regime. In many cases, contracts include explicit warnings of financial penalties, blacklisting, or even consequences for a student's family if obligations aren't met. This pressure is backed by another law as well. Under China's 2017 National Intelligence Law, every Chinese citizen and organization is legally required to, quote, support, assist, and cooperate with state intelligence work anywhere in the world. It's a sweeping mandate that allows Chinese authorities to call on overseas students and any other citizens. If they want you to target a research lab, a classmate's laptop, or a military drone on a weekend trip, refusal may not be an option. Now look, this doesn't mean that every student is a spy, not by a long shot. But it does mean that the Chinese government has a strong hold on Chinese students studying abroad. But some are spies. In 2023, 5 Chinese engineering students from the University of Michigan were caught taking photos of tanks near Camp Grayling, a National Guard training site. They arrived around midnight, and when they were spotted and questioned, one blurted out, "We're the media," before they took off. The FBI later found the students at a nearby motel where they discovered encrypted photos of military equipment and online conversations suggesting that the group had discussed wiping their phones completely. All 5 were charged with conspiracy, lying to federal agents, and destruction of records. Now, defenders say these are isolated incidents, and that's absolutely true. Most Chinese students just want a degree and a better life. And that's the rub, because they're undoubtedly right. Most are fine. But federal prosecutors, intelligence analysts, and the US military are seeing patterns, because wherever Chinese citizens go, the party goes with them. This isn't a loose idea. It's called the United Front Work, an official government strategy dating back to Mao, designed to expand the party's influence abroad by embedding loyalists inside foreign institutions. The concept is simple. Chinese citizens abroad, wherever they are in the world, are expected to further the interest of the party and to follow those instructions. So Chinese students are often encouraged to monitor peers, shape conversations on sensitive topics like Hong Kong or Taiwan, and to prevent dissent. I've already made a separate video about how a coordinated pro-Chinese propaganda campaign came right here to this channel. The link is in the description below. One tool to keep kids in line? The Chinese Students and Scholarship Associations, CSSAs. They're student groups found on nearly every major American campus where Chinese nationals study. On the surface, They function like cultural clubs, organizing Lunar New Year parties and welcome mixers and academic networking events. But behind that friendly exterior is something far more coordinated. These groups are officially recognized and, in many cases, directly supported by Chinese embassies and consultants. Their job is to monitor Chinese students abroad, promote correct views of China, and report on any activity that might embarrass the regime back home. One Chinese student in Australia held up a pro-Hong Kong sign at a rally. She was secretly photographed by other Chinese students. Days later, police visited her parents back home. She got a message: shut up or they suffer. Another student said, "I have to censor myself. This is the reality. I came to Australia and I'm still not free." It's clear these students are actually victims of their own government. Stanford, ground zero for AI research in the United States. It has over 1,000 Chinese students and has received $64 million in donations from Chinese sources that the school won't even identify. The Stanford Review has recently reported about academic espionage there and the fact that many of the Chinese students have official government handlers. That's common. In 2023, a 26-year-old Chinese graduate student drove across the country to Virginia, where the U.S. builds advanced Navy ships. When the sun went down, he launched a drone near the shipyard and flew it over a restricted zone, getting video of classified naval vessels under construction. There was bad weather, and his drone crashed into a tree. When he was gathering it, a local resident took a photo of him and his rental car's license plate. When the FBI examined the drone, they found footage of sensitive military technology. Now's a good time to tell you that I put a link in the description box below with my script and my sources. And also, if I made a significant error here, let me know in the comments and I'll pin a correction below. So let's put this in context. Is it fair to be suspicious of Chinese students studying here? I mean, China isn't the only country sending students to the United States. In fact, India sends even more. And it's really difficult to quantify the danger. As I said, there are a whole lot of students currently in the United States, and only a trivial number of them are bad actors. True espionage cases by all Chinese nationals are only in the handfuls each year. So yes, it would be completely unfair to judge thousands and thousands of students based on the actions of a few. But espionage isn't a numbers game. It's about strategic placement. One well-placed mole can do more damage than 1,000 honest students can undo. And the debate really isn't about the percentages. It's about the potential vulnerability for the United States. Do the benefits outweigh the risks? And here are a few benefits that defenders cite. Chinese students, as I said, they contribute $14 billion to the U.S. economy every year. They pay out-of-state tuition. They buy food, laptops, health insurance. Their money supports universities, cities, and local businesses. They also fill critical graduate programs, especially in the STEM fields, where often there's just not enough Americans enrolling. Chinese nationals make up a large share of PhD students in tech, and many go on to contribute to U.S. innovation, launching startups, publishing research. And there's also a philosophical argument. For decades, the U.S. has embraced what we call peace through people. Even during the Cold War, student exchanges between the United States and the Soviet Union were seen as ways to build mutual understanding. It let young people understand our democratic ideals. And some argue, and they have a point, that closing our doors now would be a mistake. But none of that erases the risks. And often, the brightest talent we train here goes back home to support military-aligned programs in China. So yes, most Chinese students aren't spies, but they're products of a system that asks more of them than we think. And when you think about it, this really isn't about just students. It's about a systemic vulnerability in open societies and how authoritarian regimes exploit that openness. And that's the dilemma. Open doors bring opportunity and risk. The question, are we doing enough to manage both? And right now, the government is split on how to deal with that. National security hawks want a crackdown. Universities and economic leaders say we can't afford to lose that talent. Some have called for a full ban or restrictions on Chinese student visas. And President Trump offered some tough talk at first, but then kind of changed his tune. Another idea is reciprocity caps, meaning we send the same number of students to them as they send back and forth to us. And finally, there's the concept of risk-based openness. This approach keeps the doors mostly open, but flags sensitive areas. Fields like AI, quantum computing, and biotech would have tighter vetting. Universities would be trained to spot espionage risks, and foreign funding disclosures would be mandatory. I mean, on one hand, that would keep the innovation pipeline alive, but it's also hard to enforce, and one bad actor can still cause real damage. So overall in the United States, there's a little tightening going on. In May of 2025, Secretary of State Rubio announced a pause on Chinese student visa interviews. The State Department introduced some new screening rules, and that includes everything from detailed background checks to social media reviews. We'll see where that goes. As I said, Trump started off talking tough, but later he weighed in on it as part of his tariff fight, and he didn't seem to worry much about a possible threat from Chinese students. So overall, what do I think will happen? To be honest, I don't predict a whole lot of widespread changes. And unless our relationship with China radically worsens, we'll likely keep playing whack-a-mole, going after the bad guys, but not upending the system. America is an open society, and that's one reason why it's so successful. It's fascinating to look at why some countries do well, and others just can't seem to get it together. And nowhere is that more glaring than on the island of Hispaniola, which is split into two countries. One is the Dominican Republic, which is doing pretty good. The other is Haiti, the poorest and most screwed up country in the Western Hemisphere. So why? The answer's complicated, and it's interesting. Hey, thanks for joining me. I hope you got something good here, and come back again.